Hello, my name is Dr. Don Buford. I'm an orthopedic surgeon based in Dallas, Texas. I've been in private practice 20 years. I've been very involved in regenerative medicine for the last 12 years or so. And on occasion, I give talks on regulations in this field. And this is a regulatory update talk that's current as of the second quarter of 2019. I can be reached at drdonbuford.com, and I am the founder and director of the Texas Orthobiologic Institute. I am not an attorney, and the opinions given in this talk are my own and are based as much as possible on fact and are referenced as we go through this talk. This is my disclosure slide as required by the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons. My most recent disclosure summary is shown on the left and is current as of September 1st, 2019. I'm very active on social media, and I'm responsible for all the posts and review them just about daily. You can see we're active on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram, Twitter, and we have a highly ranked orthopedic channel on YouTube. So what are human cellular tissues and tissue products? Well, these are defined by the Food and Drug Administration in the United States. These are articles containing or consisting of human cells or tissues that are intended for implantation, transplantation, infusion, or transfer into a human recipient. It's very important to note that the FDA does exclude certain tissues and products from their HCTP regs, and these products that are excluded are not relevant for the remainder of this talk. Number one would be vascularized human organs or transplants, so think about a heart transplant or a liver transplant. Number two would be whole blood or blood components. In regenerative medicine, this would be platelet-rich plasma, for example. And the reason why this is excluded from these regs is because the FDA already regulates whole blood and blood components under a different section of the Code of Federal Regulations. Secreted or extracted human products are also excluded from these HCTP regs. Probably most relevant for this talk and for the practicing clinician, at least in orthopedics, is that minimally manipulated bone marrow used for homologous purposes within orthopedics and not combined with another article is not considered an HCTP product and therefore is not subject to the rest of this discussion because bone marrow is not considered an HCTP by the FDA. Ancillary products used in the making of HCTP are not regulated, and in vitro diagnostic products are not regulated under these regulations either. So why is there regulatory confusion? Well, there's been these multiple laws and acts and regulations passed over the years. The basic regulations are not that confusing in my opinion. There are still some regulatory areas that are subject to interpretation, and the FDA often sends out warning letters to particular clinics or providers, and through the content of these warning letters, we can start to identify how the FDA interprets their own regulations. The primary area of the Federal Regulation Code that these products are regulated under is Title 21. So this is Title 21 of the Food and Drug Code of Federal Regulations, as noted here on this slide. The Public Health Service Act, which was passed in 1944, was the act that granted the FDA authority to prevent communicable disease. A product falling under Section 361 of this Public Health Service Act can be regulated only under 21 CFR 1271.10, which is a fancy way of saying that this act gives the FDA the ability to regulate anything that could be involved in passing communicable disease. So let's look at the actual written language involved in Section 361 of the PHS. This is critically important for the clinician and really for the salesman and distributor to understand that an HCTP product has to meet all of these criteria in order to be regulated only under Section 361. Because this is the cheap, easy, minimally regulated avenue to bring a product to market, virtually all of these products in regenerative medicine have tried to be classified as a Section 361 product. If we look at this, we can see that the HCTP has to be minimally manipulated. Number two is the HCTP has to be intended for homologous use only. Number 3 is the manufacture of the HCTP does not involve combination of the cells or tissues with another article except for the things noted: water, crystalloids, or other sterilizing or preserving or storage agents. One of the most important aspects of falling under Section 361 is number 4. If the HCTP does not have a systemic effect and is not dependent upon the metabolic activity of living cells for its primary function, then it can qualify as a Section 361 product. However, if the HCTP does have a systemic effect or it is dependent on living cells, you can substitute stem cells in a lot of our business. If it does have living cells or it's dependent on living cells or is advertised as having living cells, then it must be for autologous use, or it must be from a first or second degree blood relative, or it must be for reproductive use. And so this is where many of these products fail Section 361 criteria, because they're not from your own body, or they're not from your first or second degree relative, and they're not for reproductive use. So we will look at these one at a time. Criteria number 1, which is the criteria that states that products must be minimally manipulated, is very clear. The FDA has ruled for many different tissues and liquids or fluids what minimal manipulation means. Centrifuging is okay. Morselizing tissue is not okay. Culturing cells is not okay. That's considered more than minimal manipulation. In 2017, the FDA sent a warning letter to a company called US Stem Cell, and at the time, their chief medical officer was Kristen Comella. They were using an adipose or fat-based product, and the FDA warning letter specifically said that the SVF, which stands for stromal vascular fraction, that the SVF product does not meet the minimal manipulation criteria. And so here's an example of enzymatic tissue manipulation involved in making SVF was considered more than minimal manipulation. And as a result, adipose tissue, specifically making SVF from adipose tissue, crosses the threshold and makes that product inappropriate to be regulated only under Section 361. What about criteria number 2, homologous use? This is an area subject to interpretation, but the FDA, especially in the last year, has given us much guidance based on their actions and requests for injunctions against many companies. So in 2017, in a warning letter to US Stem Cell and also to Cell Surgical, the FDA stated that the SVF product was not intended to perform the same basic function or functions of adipose tissue, and that therefore the SVF product failed criteria for homologous use. The FDA has made this same statement now to makers of amniotic fluid products and umbilical cord, blood, and tissue products. These products are not considered homologous use within the orthopedic venue. Here's a direct quote from the FDA statement on adipose tissue and homologous use from November 2017. You can see in the highlighted region under letter B that the FDA specifically says in their own guidance document that an HCTP from adipose tissue, regardless of how it's manipulated, if it's used to treat musculoskeletal conditions such as arthritis or tendinitis, is not considered a homologous use. So therefore, adipose tissue used in orthopedics does not fall under Section 361 criteria because it's not for homologous use. This is directly from the FDA. This is not opinion. This is not interpretation. This is in black and white from the FDA itself, who is the regulatory authority. There is one company on the market, actually there's several, but here's an example of a company on the market that is still marketing an adipose product. The company is called Lipogems. They did receive a 510K to market their device and their technique, and often this is talked about as a stem cell procedure, but the issue is that the Lipogems procedure does not use enzyme to digest adipose tissue. It is a mechanical process that essentially makes large pieces of adipose into smaller pieces of adipose. And you can note in the FDA clearance document that they do state clearly that the Lipogems system does preserve the cell and tissue microarchitecture. It eliminates residues of oral emulsion and blood, and it provides a tissue that is minimally manipulated in accordance with FDA guidelines. So that's good, right? The Lipogems process does not violate the minimal manipulation guidelines. However, it does not meet the criteria for homologous use in orthopedics. And that's still very clear. Nowhere in this 510K does the FDA state that adipose is now cleared, or adipose is now in compliance with homologous use for orthopedics. That is still the issue when looking at a Section 361 product that involves adipose. What about item number 3? No combination with other articles except water, etc. In August 2017, the FDA seized smallpox vaccine from a company called Stemell that was affiliated with the Cell Surgical Network. The interesting thing about this was that this was a publicly unavailable vaccine that was being added to an adipose-based stromal vascular fraction for cancer treatment. So this clearly violated not only the homologous use criteria, but also number 3, which is that you can't add an item that is additionally unsafe and consider that still appropriate to be regulated under Section 361. It's interesting within the orthopedic realm with regenerative medicine, because if you have something like bone marrow or bone marrow concentrate that is not under the regulatory framework of this Section 361 or 351, if you add adipose tissue or add amniotic fluid or add umbilical cord or any other material that is not regulatory compliant, you've now created an orthobiologic that is not regulatory compliant. So that is an issue for all of us clinicians to be aware of. Item number 4 that must be met: are there systemic effects or living cells? It's important to understand that the FDA is a claims-made regulatory body, meaning that if I advertise my product has living cells, the FDA takes me at my word, and I have to be regulated as if I have living cells. So I can't talk out of both sides of my mouth and tell the FDA I don't have living cells and then advertise that I do. So if there are no living cells advertised or present, then I can be compliant with Section 361. If there are living cells, or I advertise that I have living cells, whether it's stem cells or any other type of living cell, if it's from my own body, then yes, I can be compliant with Section 361. If it's not from my own body, then no, I'm not compliant with Section 361, and my orthobiologic or my product falls under a different regulatory pathway. If the stem cells are not from my own body, and I still want to comply with this minimally regulated pathway under Section 361, they have to come from a first or second degree relative. So let me say that again. If the stem cells or other cells are not from my own body, then they have to be from a first or second degree relative. This obviously invalidates anything that comes out of a bottle, because the material in that bottle did not just come from my patient's first or second degree relative. If it's used for reproductive use, then I can be compliant for Section 361 purposes, but at least in my business, I'm not using stem cells or other cells for reproductive use, so this doesn't come into play for me clinically. What evidence do we have that what I'm saying is true, or that the FDA interprets it the same way that I'm relating? Well, going all the way back 6 years, FDA sent a letter to Osiris Therapeutics. In that letter, they stated that Osiris Therapeutics was marketing a product with living cells, and the cells were clearly not from first or second degree relatives of the patients, and therefore this product was in violation of Section 361. Is there any other evidence? Well, here we have another bit of evidence where the Cell Surgical Network had a list of indications for stromal vascular fraction. Again, that's an adipose-derived product. And the FDA let Cell Surgical know that these products were improperly regulated under Section 361. They were marketed as having living cells. They were marketed as treating a wide range of non-homologous uses. And despite multiple claims of regulatory compliance by the Cell Surgical Network, including the idea that because this was researched, the FDA had no regulatory authority, all of these claims were found to be not sustainable, and subsequently there's been injunctions sought against Cell Surgical Network. So what happens if we have a product that doesn't meet the Section 361 product regulations? So this may be a product that's non-homologous. It may be a product that's more than minimally manipulated. It may be a product where the cells come from someone other than the patient. If that's the case, then we have to go to a different section of the PHS Act. We have to go to Section 351. This is the section that costs more money. It requires studies. Basically what happens is in this section, all of these products are truly drugs. The FDA regulates them as if they are a drug. The fact that they have biologic properties is irrelevant. They are now considered drugs, and they fall through the same drug regulatory pathway as most other drugs. In order to be used in humans and sold for use in humans, the FDA requires approval of a biologics license application, often abbreviated as a BLA. The FDA also requires an investigational new drug application, often abbreviated as an IND. And here's the key for a clinician or for a distributor or a manufacturer. These things have to be approved by the FDA before interstate shipment and before administration to humans. I can't tell you how many times a company has told me, well, we're selling it now and we have a BLA and IND, quote unquote, on order, or we have our application in. Well, that's not good enough. You can't sell it, you can't ship it across state lines until it's approved. You can't start using this in humans until the FDA has approved it. And you can see how long and expensive and onerous the pathway can sometimes be to get these drugs to market. So you can see here there's two major pathways. There's some new ones that we'll talk about later, but the primary pathway that you'll hear and need to be familiar with as a clinician is Section 361, which is a self-designation where a vendor or salesperson or manufacturer can go to an online application at the FDA website. It takes 30 to 45 minutes to fill it out. I've done it myself just to check the process. It costs $0. I can create an LLC online. I can buy product online, and I can be selling this stuff over the internet literally within 7 days, and it costs me nothing. And I can market all sorts of crazy claims. Section 351, which is the pathway for biologic drugs, requires bench studies, animal studies, human data to prove safety and efficacy. The application fees can range over $2 million. The annual fees can be over $500,000 a year. The time to market can be 5 to 15 years. The development costs can be millions of dollars. And at the end of that whole process, the FDA may still decide not to let your product come to market. So you can see why there is an incredible incentive for companies to go through the Section 361 pathway that is free and almost instantaneous compared to the Section 351 pathway. So that is why, part of the reason why, in my opinion, why the market is just saturated with products and companies and salespeople whose products are only regulated under Section 361. What happens if a product doesn't meet Section 361 regulations despite being marketed that way? Well, a few years ago, there was a very famous case. A Houston company called Celtex moved its treatment operations to Mexico because they got a warning from the FDA that their products were not Section 361 compliant. They were banking cells and returning these banked cells back to patients and culture expanding cells, and that was clearly ruled more than minimal manipulation. It was ruled as selling and using biologic drugs, and as a result, Celtex moved its operations out of the United States. Why would they do this? Well, one reason might be that it was significantly cheaper to just move their operations to Mexico than it was to go through the Section 351 years-long expensive pathway to actually prove up that a biologic drug works and that a biologic drug is worthy of FDA approval. For those of you that are interested, here's the online registration page to register a 361 product. So any of you that want to create a distributorship, here's the Cliff Notes version on how to do it. You go to this website, you check some boxes. It doesn't cost anything. You have to update it once a year. You just identify what you're selling. And here, just to be tongue-in-cheek, we called it Buford blood. It's umbilical cord blood. It's a proprietary process. I'm going to market 3 million MSCs or stem cells per cc. And in filling out this form online, guess what? I had to do no background check. They didn't check my CV. I didn't have to submit a single animal study. They didn't check my lab. They didn't check my office. They didn't check my supplier. They didn't check my distribution and sales network. They didn't check my marketing. They did nothing. I filled out this online form, and now I can market on my website that I have Buford blood and that I am FDA regulated. This is the problem with the current status of the industry. So going back 5 or 6 years, there's been some recent draft guidelines that have helped clarify by giving examples and further identifying what the FDA considers to be appropriately regulated products. In 2014, there was the draft guidance issued on minimal manipulation, and in 2015, there was the draft guidance issued on homologous use. Both of these are available at the links noted. We'll go through some of these in a few minutes. The 21st Century Cures Act was passed in December 2016, and this is highly relevant because in this act, the FDA created a new mechanism other than Section 351 and 361 to grant accelerated approval for some regenerative medicine products and techniques. It created a new designation of regenerative advanced therapy and granted priority FDA review for these so designated therapies and products. What they decided was that a company could do animal testing and skip over efficacy testing in humans and just report on post-procedure review. So this significantly shortens the time to market, and it significantly shortens the regulatory burden on a manufacturer. One of the caveats was that the product in question had to address a serious disease, which at the time was undefined, and it had to have the potential to satisfy currently unmet medical needs. One of the first companies to take advantage of this in the orthopedic realm was MiMedx. In March 2018, they got the 15th RMAT designation for treating knee osteoarthritis with injectable amniotic tissue, and you can see the press release here. One of the things, as an aside, that I think is very interesting to note is that the fact that MiMedx had to get an RMAT to market and use this in humans further validates the point that amniotic fluid is non-homologous and is inappropriately registered under Section 361 if that's what a company is doing. It is non-homologous regardless of any claim of living stem cells. MiMedx did not claim that they had living cells in their amniotic product, but they did recognize that it was non-homologous use in orthopedics, which is why they applied for and were granted this RMAT designation. It's also interesting to note that clearly the FDA considers osteoarthritis as a significant health problem in the United States that obviously costs billions of dollars a year in lost time and lost productivity. So we have a framework here to get these products to market in a much quicker fashion than the Section 351 pathway. We just are hopeful that more and more companies take advantage of it. Last year, several colleagues and I decided to do our own little stem graft challenge. This was kind of like the old school Coke, Pepsi taste test, and in combination with a secret shopper kind of format. And our goal was to obtain as many samples from companies advertising living stem cells in amniotic or umbilical cord blood or tissue products, and to test them to see if they actually had functional living stem cells after following the manufacturer directions for use in humans. All instructions were followed to the letter. Testing was done at a major university lab and includes all MSC markers and quantification and culturing. These were the companies who we contacted. I purchased some of these products personally. You can see I purchased product from Rich Source Stem Cells, from Stemell, which is a company that's filed for bankruptcy since because of lawsuits filed against them. I also purchased product from Chara Biologics in Chatsworth. You can see that 1 cc of these allograft fluid products was incredibly expensive. $1,325, $1,477, and $1,772 for 1 cc, and virtually all of these companies claim between 3 and 6 million living stem cells. Here's some documentation of where we purchased our product from. And to summarize, which is actually very easy, to summarize, there were no significant functional stem cells found in a single product, not in one product, after following the manufacturer's thawing directions to the T. So that's great. That's been circulated and published. And what about any other validation of that comment? Is there any other peer-reviewed data on allograft stem cells? And as a matter of fact, there is. In 2019, amniotic fluid products were examined by Lisa Fortier and Brian Cole. They examined 9 different amnion products from 4 different manufacturers, and then they had similar results as our group results with umbilical cord products. They found no stem cells, and probably as interesting, they found low or no significant growth factor levels. This is interesting because that's one of the main sales points that all of us in the business are approached with, that these products have high level of growth factors, they have high levels of stem cells, they're much, much better than your own autograft bone marrow or bone marrow concentrate. Studies have shown that those claims are absolutely false. So here we have another 2019 peer-reviewed publication. This is published in the American Journal of Sports Medicine, well-respected, well-established orthopedic surgery journal. And in this publication from Wyatt Anderson and Alan Hirahara and Alberto Pinero, they looked at multiple amniotic products, Palingen, FlowGraft, Genesis AFP, and they found that these products did not have stem cells. Not that they only had a few, but that they did not have stem cells at all. Fresh amniotic fluid did not contain stem cells, and they actually, as a control, did test bone marrow aspirate in the same lab at the same time, and bone marrow aspirate absolutely did have stem cells. So this has been independently verified across multiple academic centers where researchers and doctors and surgeons' reputations are put on the line, as well as the academic reputation of the center. And time after time after time again, we see that these claims of allograft stem cells out of a bottle having millions of stem cells being patently inaccurate. What about exosomes? Over the last 3 or 4 years, the term exosome has become a hot topic. It's become the latest, greatest snake oil in regenerative medicine. And I say that because there's absolutely no human studies that show that it has any effect on anything, at least not in orthopedics. I don't know about other conditions personally. Exosomes are not new. They're well established in biology. They're simply extracellular vesicles that are produced inside most cells in humans. And what these marketers are claiming is that exosomes cooked in a lab can be injected IV or into a joint or in a specific location, and that whatever the chemicals are in the exosomes, they will go on to magically create healing. How are they regulated? Well, we don't really know is the short answer. We do know that exosomes are secretions from cultured living cells. Companies that are marketing these products have to be culturing cells and then storing or harvesting the exosome secretions, basically harvesting the fluid that the cells grew in. The regulatory approach has not been ultimately decided by the FDA, but we know 5 things. We know that exosomes come from cultured living cells. We know that there's genetic material in exosomes, specifically mRNA. We know that exosomes have material that can influence cells at a distance, meaning they can have a systemic effect. We know that they don't remain local. And we do know that culturing living cells is considered making a drug by the FDA. They ruled that back in 2014 in the case with Regenerative Sciences. So that's incontrovertible. Right now, the makers of exosomes have only registered under Section 361, indicating that their product does not have a systemic effect, that their product is not the product of a Section 351 process, which is what culturing cells is. It is my opinion and the opinion of many others in the field that that exosomes likely fall under Section 351 regulatory pathway, and until makers have cleared that pathway, they should not be sold and used in humans. This is before we even get to the absolute lack of any clinical data and the incredible expense. It's interesting because the FDA now has a process that can take less than a week for anybody to get a preliminary ruling on the proper regulatory classification of their product. I've asked people multiple times to send me the FDA letter showing that their product is correctly registered under Section 351 or 361. To date, not a single manufacturer has. The answer that we all get is that their application is in, it's on hold, they're waiting for a response. And even if that is true, you still cannot sell these products or use them in humans until the application has been ruled on. So what is the truth on exosomes now? Well, I've been offered 1 cc of exosomes for $900 per cc. That actually may seem like a bargain compared to some of those umbilical cord prices. However, we can make PRP for about $140 per cc. So it's 7 times more expensive, give or take. There is a huge body of clinical evidence, level 1 through level 4 evidence, that platelet-rich plasma is a viable treatment for many human orthopedic conditions. There is no peer-reviewed evidence published that exosomes work for any human orthopedic condition. There are internet claims that exosomes work for virtually every human pathology in orthopedics, neurology, nephrology, the immune system, the endocrine system, and on and on and on. So are they really magic bullets that suddenly sprung into existence 3 or 4 years ago? I have to wait until there's proof that they are properly FDA registered and that there is any evidence at all showing efficacy for the patients I care for. More than placebo, more than video, and more than patient testimonial. I need true expert opinion from someone who is not financially tied to selling these biologic drugs. So let's shift gears for a minute. Let's look at some of the recent legal actions in regenerative medicine. Fortunately, the FDA has become increasingly aggressive in going after bad actors in the field. They've increasingly used the Justice Department to file injunctions, and I think this is a net positive in this field. We want to make sure the baby does not get thrown out with the bathwater, and that the good research and the good clinics and clinicians that are working in this field continue to expand our knowledge base. But right now, the bad far, far outweighs the good in terms of clinical practice. Here's an example, a horrible example, from 2018. A manufacturer by the name of GeneTech and a distributor by the name of Livion distributed product that was an umbilical cord-based product, and it was tainted with E. coli. One of the things you'll see in these recurring stories is that places that are making these allograft products are not abiding by standard clinical laboratory guidelines. And here's an example of what can happen. I think in this example, there were well over 10 people that were septic, had life-threatening illnesses, and as a result, with the FDA's involvement, Livion had to issue a voluntary nationwide recall of this product. GeneTech, to my understanding, has gone out of business. I think that Livion as a distributor is still in business, but if you Google Livion and their founder, I think you will find all the information you need to decide if you want to work with that company. In 2018, the FDA sought permanent injunctions against 2 large regenerative medicine networks. One is US Stemell, which is a publicly traded company in Florida. This is a company that has made the news over and over and over again for some of their quote-unquote medical treatment protocols and some of their research they were doing. There were multiple patients who were blinded by their treatment protocols. Their chief scientific officer at the time was Kristen Camella. She has since resigned from the company. And back in 2018, the FDA sought a permanent injunction against them because they were using adipose tissue and making stromal vascular fraction, despite the FDA for many, many years saying that that was making a biologic drug. In a very similar fashion, the FDA sought permanent injunction against Cell Surgical Network, which is a network that was run or chaired or led by Elliot B. Lander and Mark Berman. Both of these clinicians were directing their clinics and their networks to use adipose tissue and to make stromal vascular fraction. And the FDA in a very similar fashion to their action against U.S. stem cell, acted against the Cell Surgical Network to stop them from doing these procedures and calling them stem cell procedures. Just a few months ago, the U.S. stem cell permanent injunction was validated. The federal court issued a decision holding that U.S. stem cells had to stop their practices. This led to Kristen Carmela resigning from the company. My understanding is there's still several patient lawsuits pending. We do not have a final ruling on the Cell Surgical Network permanent injunction, is my understanding, but I can't see a reason why they wouldn't have the same outcome as U.S. stem cell. There's another company called StemGenX, and StemGenX was marketing an unapproved product. Again, this was an adipose tissue-based product. Because of the FDA's concerns, they warned them. StemGenX continued to sell the product. You'll notice another recurring fact here in that they advertise a laundry list of medical conditions across all different human body systems, saying that their product could cure all of these systems. And now they're facing a class action lawsuit with over 100 patients suing them. You can see the links in the FDA references here. R3 Stem Cell was primarily a marketing organization where you could join their marketing organization and they would direct patients to the clinic. This is an organization that was started by David Green, who was an orthopedic surgeon who lost his license, I believe, in Arizona. He lost his license because there were multiple deaths. I think it was at least 5 deaths that were deemed to be his responsibility as the operating surgeon. So he lost his medical license as an orthopedic surgeon. He still identifies himself as a doctor, but he obviously was not able to practice medicine. So he started this marketing company. This just raises the concern of research your provider, research your clinic, not only at the state, but also at the federal level. Check the specialty of the provider. Are you being treated by a doctor, a nurse, a chiropractor? Are they a psychologist? Are they a nephrologist? Are they a plastic surgeon telling you what's wrong with your bad knee? I would also check for FDA actions, check for other legal actions, check for prior convictions in healthcare. That was one of the early tip-offs against a company called Stem Cell Institute of America. And the bottom line is, if we're going to protect patients and their finances, we have to be diligent as their healthcare advisors. In this letter to R3 Stem Cell, they were put on notice that they were marketing unapproved stem cell products for treating serious conditions. Here's yet another one. This is September 3rd, 2019. Stemell received this warning letter from the FDA. Stemell is selling and promoting an umbilical cord blood and umbilical cord product. And you can see here in the letter that it is not ambiguous. The FDA says that umbilical cord products are not intended for homologous use. They also say that these products, if they're going to be used in humans, there must be an investigational new drug application in effect before selling and using in humans. None of these companies have that, and that's why they're systematically being warned and, if need be, shut down through permanent injunctions. Here's another company based in Southern California that uses an umbilical cord product. They've also added an exosome product to their repertoire. Here are all the red flags. They list 35 medical conditions on the website. Right on the website, despite all these FDA rulings, Char Biologics mentions that they use highly concentrated placental MSC-derived exosomes, for example. They mention that they use a high-potency, minimally manipulated umbilical cord-derived product with cells. All of these things make these products Section 351. However, they do not have an investigational new drug license or any other FDA designation that would allow them to sell this and use it in humans. Why haven't they been formally reprimanded? We don't know yet. There may be a warning letter in the near future or even an injunction, because that's what the FDA has done against very similar clinics. The FDA was asked specifically about Char Biologics, and you can see the response just a couple months ago. All of the approved stem cell-based products are included on the FDA's link. It's publicly available. You can see it on this slide. And none of these products are sponsored by Chara Biologics. So they're using a product that is a stem cell allograft product that is not properly registered with the FDA. So this is obviously very frustrating, not only for patients, but also for clinicians. The question I get often is, are there any regenerative medicine doctors or clinics that are ethical? Because it's overwhelming to go through webpage after webpage of clinics and providers with these amazing claims and these amazing prices. Several years ago, many of us started a consortium called the Orthobiologic Ethics Consortium. It can be found at the website orthobioethics.com. Anybody that signs on and agrees with the ethics statement, which is it's free to read, it's free to sign on, it's free to abide by it, but it is a self-policing entity, so people that have signed on know that their publicly available marketing and their practices stand to peer review from anyone else that's in the consortium, which I think the way we have to self-police at this stage. In 2019, many of us produced a consensus statement. This was a multidisciplinary group of surgeons and doctors and attorneys that work in the healthcare regulatory field. And you can see the consensus statement at the link on the bottom of the slide. And in summary, the statement says that the aggressive marketing approach currently used by practitioners and clinics regarding various birth tissue products as safe and effective stem cell therapy is not supported by the existing scientific literature. So it doesn't mean it'll never happen. It does mean that it sure has not happened now. And it does mean that at this point in the field, there are way more misbranded, misregulated products being sold to patients than there are legitimate outposts. This year, we also had a Delphi panel that was convened and really spearheaded by Dr. Chris Santino. That Delphi panel was designed to come up with some consensus statements on using bone marrow concentrate for pain or orthopedic diseases. Remember that bone marrow concentrate is not subject to the FDA Section 351 or 361 regulations unless you add something to bone marrow like umbilical cord blood or adipose or amniotic fluid. But if you just use the bone marrow or bone marrow concentrate, it is not even considered a human cellular tissue or tissue product if it is autologous from the patient. The Delphi method is a process where we can arrive at group opinion, ideally expert group opinion, by surveying a panel. The experts respond to several rounds of questionnaires and the responses are aggregated and shared. Once you reach greater than 80% consensus on a particular question, then we deem that question as a consensus statement that most, if not all, of the experts agree to. Panel members on this particular Delphi panel from this year came from the following academic institutions. You can see them listed there. They're some of the most preeminent institutions for human biology and where stem cell research is happening, both at the bench and in the clinic. You can see here the 25 members of the Delphi panel, and you can see here how we were recruited. It was based on academic affiliation or publications in the field that were peer-reviewed or leadership positions in several key professional groups in this medical field. We ended up with 9 points of consensus, and I won't go through them all here, but you can see the different points listed on this slide. They involve treatment registries, candidacy grades, informed consent, publications, advertising, all of these things that are important to think about if you're going to be a doctor taking care of people in this space where the treatments are still considered experimental. So that's not to say that I think that all of these treatments are experimental. We certainly have level 1 evidence for multiple orthobiologics for multiple orthopedic conditions, but the payers, primarily the insurance companies and Medicare, are the ones that are deeming these non-covered procedures at this point. So in summary, clinicians really should understand the basic FDA Section 361 and 351 regulations regarding human cells and tissue products if they're going to be active in this field. The stem cell marketing and clinical claims of treatment success far exceed what has been documented in peer-reviewed literature. Fortunately, in the internet age, all of us, including patients, can go to Google Scholar or PubMed.com and do some basic research ourselves. If an amniotic fluid or umbilical cord blood tissue product has living stem cells and yet it is still registered as a Section 361 product, you as the doctor may be breaking the law if you sell it, buy it, or inject it. As a patient, That is a question to ask your clinic and your provider. How is this product registered? The answer may shock you. If a company even claims their product has living stem cells, then the product falls under Section 351. Currently, there are no FDA-compliant frozen stem cells in a bottle in the United States. There is a mechanism for all vendors to submit their products to the FDA for the FDA's regulatory opinion. Personally, I would accept nothing less from anyone selling me a stem cell product that didn't come from my own body. Because of all the work that we've done and the peer-reviewed publications, we already know that as currently produced, none of these products have living functional stem cells after being thawed out in the doctor's office. Amniotic fluid, umbilical cord blood or tissue, Wharton's jelly, and adipose tissue are all considered non-homologous for use in orthopedics and therefore need to be cleared for human use under Section 351 or the RMAT pathway prior to interstate commerce and use on humans. The FDA has granted a brief respite for companies and clinics and doctors that are not compliant with this, but that expires in November of 2020. So time is rapidly approaching when doctors that are not compliant are going to be targeted, as well as the clinics and makers. We can see that the FDA has already started to get permanent injunctions against some of the more egregious offenders in this field. Exosomes have not been ruled on by the FDA, to my knowledge, as to whether they are Section 351 or 361. They are the product of cultured allograft stem cells, so nobody really disputes how they're made. So the significant part of their manufacture has already been deemed to be a Section 351 drug-making activity by the FDA. So as a clinician, I would never put my patients at risk or put myself at risk for using a product that a manufacturer could have a regulatory opinion on in less than a couple weeks, and yet they don't. Clinicians must stay in the know with the changing regulatory landscape, and I really think that as clinicians, we need to continue to ask questions and demand data as we determine science versus science fiction for our patients. I appreciate your time and listening to this webinar. Hopefully it was helpful and raises some questions. We can be reached at all the meetings and at all the social media sites listed on the right. Thank you very much.